Hey guys, Yips here with another video, and this one is going to be about how to maximize your DPS on a boss encounter. And the reason this video is so important is because I come out with a lot of guides that talk about how to do the optimal damage rotation on a boss fight. And while it's important to know how to do the optimal DPS rotation to a boss on a single target encounter, 99.99% of bosses in raiding scenarios, you're not able to use this optimal damage rotation. You're not able to consistently do what I'm showing you in the videos because there's mechanics, because there's ads that spawn, because there's so many different things that happen during the fight that make it so the optimal damage rotation isn't possible to maintain. And if the optimal damage rotation isn't possible to maintain, it no longer becomes the optimal damage rotation. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. I want to talk about how to maximize your DPS, and there are a couple topics that I'm going to talk about when it comes to that, okay? And the first topic that I'm going to talk about is abusability, all right? And so basically what this means is how can you abuse your class, the mechanics that your class brings, and also the mechanics of the boss, so both your mechanics and the boss mechanics in a raid encounter. So let's just talk about Affliction Warlock. This can talk about any class. You can apply this to every single class in World of Warcraft because they all have different mechanics that allow them to do more damage in different scenarios. For example, a Frost DK has different cooldowns that make him do massive AoE damage. Fury Warriors, whenever they kill an ad, they gain 30% haste and movement speed. So you can see that those are mechanics that they can abuse during a boss fight, and Warlock does have their own mechanics that they can abuse during a boss fight. So let's talk a little bit about what mechanics Warlocks abuse in a boss fight, and let's talk about how you should be thinking to utilize them in a raid encounter. So obviously, Affliction Warlocks, their greatest tool is going to be their weapon, their traits of their weapon, and the reason being is because we have so many interactions with ads that you really need to think about boss fights that have ads and how we can abuse those ads on that boss, okay? So let's just take a look at the traits that really affect that, and the main traits I want to cover are going to be Soul Flame and Wrath of Consumption. These are just two great traits that really can benefit you a lot in a raid encounter, and you should really be thinking about how to maximize them before you go into a boss fight. So let's look at the first one. It's going to be Soul Flame. Whenever you kill a target, its soul bursts into flames, dealing a certain amount of damage to all nearby enemies. So what this means is if there's an ad standing next to a bunch of other creatures and you kill it, it's going to burst into flames, dealing damage to everything around it. This is a very important ability to abuse in a boss fight that has a lot of ads, because if there's a lot of ads dying and you're not targeting them, you're just missing out on free millions and millions of damage via this Soul Flame talent. So you really need to think on a boss fight, for example, like even Stararger, he's a very subtle example of this, but the little voidlings that he spawns in phase 3, you can dot those, and when they die, they'll explode for a free 150 to 300k damage that you didn't even have to use a global on, and plus your dots are ticking on them, making you do even more damage, okay? So this is one thing that you can really think about. The other one is Wrath of Consumption. And again, bringing back those voidlings. If you dot them, you gain this buff when they die. You gain 2% increased damage on your damage over time effects, stacking up to 5 times, meaning if you kill up to 5 mobs, you will gain a 5 stack of this. It does refresh every single time you kill a mob, and you will deal 10% increased damage for 20 seconds. Now, 10% increased DPS is a lot of DPS, so you also want to think about how can I abuse Wrath of Consumption on a boss fight. So those are two really easy tools that you can think about as an Affliction Warlock on a boss fight that you can abuse. But not only that, there are a few more that Blizzard's given us to deal with ads. One is going to be from Unstable Affliction. If you UA an ad and it dies within the timer of the Unstable Affliction, it will refund 1 soul shard. So what this means is, for example, on a boss like Botanist, when the flowers spawn and you UA them and they're dying extremely quickly, oftentimes they'll die within 4 to 5 seconds, and your UA will not have fully ticked down yet, meaning you got all of that free damage from this resource, and you got it right back in the form of a soul shard, which you can use to spend on another UA. So this is another ability you can think about how to abuse in a boss fight. And the last one is going to be Drain Soul, and when you drain a target and it dies, you generate 1 soul shard. So it's really important whenever an ad is getting low, if you're low on soul shards, not if you're high, but if you're low on soul shards, can you abuse this to gain them back and pump that damage right back into the boss, okay? So these are just some of the tools that a UA Warlock has to deal with on a boss, and you can already start thinking about a lot of different bosses where you can abuse these mechanics on. Xavius is a great example of how to abuse Wrath of Consumption because of all those little ads that are spawning when he's in the middle of the room in phase 2. All these ads that are coming into the boss, you can dot them, and when they die, you gain that Wrath of Consumption buff, and you can almost maintain 100% uptime on 10% increased damage. Now, is dotting those ads part of the optimal damage rotation? No, but is it optimal to do that in that raid encounter? Yes, it is, okay? So that's what I mean by abusing your class on a boss fight. You want to abuse the tools that Blizzard has given you on a boss fight. You want to be popping your Reap Souls when you have a lot more dots out than normal. You want to be using different cooldowns that you have, your racial, whatever it might be, your potion, when you're going to be doing more damage than normal to the boss, okay? And that's something you guys should really think about on your boss fights. Use some intuition along with the optimal damage rotation, and that will help you do a lot more damage, okay? The next part of abusing the boss I want to talk about is the mechanics that the boss has himself, okay? I think Corrosis is one of the perfect examples for this as a UA Warlock, because there's a bunch of different times where it's not optimal to only be using 2 UAs, and the reason being is often you'll find yourself on bosses getting shard capped, and you never want that. It's much more efficient for your DPS to be using more shards than normal than be capping on them, because you don't want to be losing out on that unstable affliction DPS, okay? So just an example on Crosis, right? A lot of the time he'll have beams, right? He'll have a beam that shoots to the right, and then he'll have a beam that shoots to the left, and then to the right and the left, okay? So on the boss fight, you're starting in the middle, okay? And he shoots a beam on the left-hand side. Well, you're going to move to the right, dump some UAs into the boss, drain them, and you know the next beam is coming from the right side, okay? So what you should do is when your dots are fading, you should refresh them, but as you refresh them, you should be moving to the left side preemptively. And what this allows you to do is basically pre-plan your movement on the boss in order to just ignore his mechanic and abuse the fact that his mechanics are preset. Therefore, you can predict what's going to happen next, and you can put yourself in a better position to deal with it, okay? Not only that, on Crosis, he also has adds that spawn in the form of he puts these little meteor crystals on the ground, these like swirly pools, and you have to go and stand in them or else an ad will spawn. Well, when you run away from him, you're no longer able to dot the boss. You're no longer able to hit him. Therefore, you should probably dump all of your soul shards before you leave to go and soak those ads. So what you should be doing is, getting rid of all your UAs. That mechanic happens, and you should be running back, and you'll be low on soul shards. You run back, you soak the thing, but the entire time you're doing this, you're just generating soul shards. So you're not really losing out on damage because you're not draining those UAs off. You're just using those shards so you don't get overcapped when you run away from the boss, okay? So those are some things as an Affliction Warlock that are really important to note about boss mechanics. You really need to abuse the fact that you have a resource that's constantly generating, and you want to make sure you spend it all before the boss goes away, okay? Before you can't hit the boss anymore. Another great example of this is on Elisande, okay? When Elisande dies, she resets the fight and goes back to full health, and you can't attack her for that period. So you probably don't want to be dumping all of your damage when she's 1% away from resetting. Obviously, this is a very, obvious example, but you don't want to be using all your UAs when she's 1% from going back up. You want to be saving them for when she comes back down so you can dump all your damage. Controversially, if you're at 5 shards and she's 10% away from dying, you should probably dump all of those UAs into the boss in order to get all of that damage out before she goes away, and then you'll have some shards available for when she comes back. So those are some really, really important things that you need to be thinking about on a boss fight, especially as a Warlock, but not only a Warlock, you can apply that to any class. A Death Knight, you don't want to be using your Pillar of Frost when you can't hit the boss anymore. I mean, that's just some obvious stuff, but that kind of leads me into my next topic, which is consistency, okay? So being consistent on a boss fight is very important. Now, I understand when you're progressing in a boss fight, you're going to be trying out many different strategies, okay? You're going to be trying out a lot of different things. You're going to be, figuring out how you want to kill the boss, but eventually your group will settle on one specific strategy, and once they settle on that one specific strategy, you should be maintaining the same damage rotation for the most part for the entire fight every single time that you do it. You don't want to vary the way that you're dealing damage to the boss, and the reason being is the more consistent you are, the better you're going to get at doing that damage to the boss, and also you're going to know when to pop your cooldowns at the right time, and if you know exactly at every single point in the boss when you're going to use your cooldowns, you're going to be able to optimize around that much better if you remain consistent. So a simple example is, okay, you're going to lust on the boss at 30%, and there's going to be ad spawning at 60%, so what you're going to want to do is before the boss hits 60%, when the boss is at like 65%, you're probably going to want to be saving some damage for those ads. And when the boss is getting close to 30%, when the boss is at 40%, you should then know, I should probably start saving reap stacks. I should probably save my cooldowns if they're just coming off, if they just came back up. You should probably be saving that for when those things are about to happen. And if you're able to remain consistent during a boss encounter and basically set out, okay, this is when I use my cooldowns, this is when I use my cooldowns, and this is when I use my cooldowns, then you're going to end up seeing a lot better results. And a really simple example of that as an Affliction Warlock is when you're wearing Sifus. Oh, crap. Let me just put this on. When you're using Sifus, and if you have an Infernal, and you're proccing Sifus with Infernal Meteor Strike, you should be thinking, okay, well, I have Meteor Strike every single minute, so, okay, I have it now, let's pop it. Let's dump a bunch of damage into the boss, okay? Like this, with the additional haste buff, so you're doing a lot of damage, you're maximizing around this proc, okay? And okay, well, it's off cooldown in 50 seconds, I'm probably not too worried about it right now, let's just do one Reap stack, and let's dump it to the boss again. But now that it's coming off cooldown soon, it's coming back in 40 seconds, okay? I should probably start thinking about saving resources for when the Sifus comes back, okay? I probably shouldn't be doing the optimal damage rotation right now because I know I'm going to get this massive haste buff in 30 seconds. And when I have that, I want to make sure I have a lot of shards. I want to make sure I have a lot of reap stacks. And this applies to everything on the boss, whether it be a trinket proc, whether it be when a priority ad spawns, whether it be when you're about to bloodlust. You want to be thinking about these things on a boss fight because you don't want to be left sitting there like a duck when cooldowns are coming back, or you're supposed to do a lot of damage and not have these resources with order to do a bunch of damage. So you see, I was only using one UA there, and while that is not the optimal damage rotation, now I have a bunch of UAs and a bunch of reap for when my Sifus comes up, so I'm able to proc that and dump all my UAs with that haste buff, with that additional damage, and able to pump that into the boss. So that's just a very simple example that I can show you straight up, but you can obviously think about how to apply that to a boss. So I hope this video helps you guys have a little bit more intuition about how to approach a boss fight, and I'll see you guys later.